what self-stewardship essentially is you have to think of yourself as someone you're responsible for taking care of. You have to imagine this body, this being, as being loaned to you. Nobody asked to be born. We all exist not without our consent. We came into this world without asking to. So in a way, being alive alone is not a right. The very fact that we come into this world without asking to be born is saying that life is a gift.
We're stoked to have Sherry Ning on the pod today. Sherry's the wonderful human behind the Twitter account Schrodinger's Brat and the popular blog Pluripotent. Like pluripotent stem cells, which aren't fixed and can become anything, her articles start out as stem cell ideas, which is fitting for someone who is intensely curious. She's also the new author of The Pluri Society, 171 Notes on What It Means to Grow into Yourself. Sherry, it's been great getting to know you, starting out from Twitter, then to video call, and then finally in person in San Francisco. To start it off, you've said in one of your pieces, I don't like being seen as a content creator. In fact, I don't believe content creation or writing is an occupation because it denotes that creating or writing is a thing we do instead of something we embody naturally. For me, writing is not what I do, it's who I am. So if you're not a writer, then I'm curious, how would you introduce yourself to someone today? Who is Sherry Ning?
Well, funnily enough, I actually do tell people I'm a writer just because it's simple and it gets the conversation going. I think it's one thing to be something occupationally, to do it because it pays the bill, because you have a title on LinkedIn. But it's another thing to feel like this is my natural, this is my calling, it's my vocation. I'm doing it because every fiber of my being feels like it's a fish in water when I'm doing so. I know which piece you're referring to on Substack. That one was more, that was supposed to be geared more towards the philosophical definition of doing something as a writer. But I do introduce myself as a writer.
Yeah, it does make it more convenient. When do you think that point was for that transition? I'm assuming you weren't born thinking that you're a writer, and all through like early schooling, we are writing in class for assignments and stuff. But then at some point, it did become your calling, your vocation. What was that like for you?
I didn't really start calling myself a writer until, I guess the unofficial part was when I realized how much people know me for my writing. I wouldn't say I'm mainstream famous, but I would say that in certain circles, especially on Twitter, I feel like my reputation does precede me. Like people will know me for my writing before they actually know me as a person. So, I mean, if that doesn't count as like you are what you do, then I don't know what does. But I think the reality of saying I'm a writer really settled in when I started working with David Perel for his writing school, Rite of Passage. So I'm his brand writer and I write the weekly newsletters for that school. But after that, I think that's when I really started feeling like officially this is actually what I do now. Like I actually just write.
Did you imagine you would end up doing something like this when you were a kid? Was this who you were as a person? You enjoyed writing all the way from you were fish in water when you were writing as a younger child growing up, or is this something you've recently fallen in love with?
Not as a child. I was reading picture books up to like grade 6. I was very behind in my class for most of, except for music, art, and drama. Everything else, like math, English, whatever, like I was always, I wouldn't say I was failing, but I was definitely like median or slightly below median. It wasn't too great. It wasn't until high school when I really started, I don't know how I got into writing, but I did have a tutor that kind of taught me the basics of like how to do it, like how to write a good essay. But I think it was one of those things where once I got good at it, I started liking it more. And then that kind of became a positive cycle where the more I liked it, the better I got at it. And writing just kind of became my thing by the end of high school. I mean, grade 11 and 12, and for almost every year in college, I would always have at least one class or one teacher who would ask if they could keep a copy of something I wrote as like a sample for future students. And I didn't think too much of it at the time. Not out of like, I don't think it was out of like extreme humility, but just at the time I didn't really think much about it. But now looking back, that actually meant a lot. Like that means a lot to me, that a college level teacher who assigns essays would want a copy for reference for the future, whatever use it may be. I think being good at writing was something I sort of denied, or something I just thought of as a tool. Like everyone should know how to write. Everyone should know how to compose a good email, for example, right? Like it's writing is a skill. It's not. It shouldn't be the bread and butter of what you do or everything you do. A Substack, a newsletter is just kind of, I publish whenever I want to and whenever I have great ideas. But I didn't really realize that I had a thing for writing these sort of like email sent essays until last year when I worked in corporate. There was like a segment of our office where we called it like Friday. It was like a catchy alliteration, like another F, like Friday something. But anyway, it was like a weekly, once every week on Friday, someone part of this committee would send out an email about, so there's something curious, something fun. And that was my favorite part of the job. Like it was consulting, it was corporate. Like it had nothing to do with the actual core of the role, but that was my favorite part of working at that company, was writing that weekly Friday essay it wasn't even an essay, it was like a few words. But writing that email to the entire office was like my favorite part of the job. And to think that less than a year later, I'm doing that full time, or just doing it on my own terms, is kind of, it's kind of crazy. It's so unexpected, but it's fun, and it is what I like to do.
I'd love to hear a bit more about your transition period. We've had quite a few guests now on the podcast who have over time discovered a passion of theirs, and oftentimes that is something creative that leads them to move away from a standard 9 to 5 job and ultimately pursue what they like. And there's usually like this aha moment or a goal they set themselves where, if I hit this, then I'll become independent and I'll do this side hobby as a full-time thing and be all in about it. So I'm curious for you, when that moment was it when you were writing those Friday updates at your 9 to 5? When did you know that you could begin to do this independently and focus on it? And how did that change your relationship with writing?
I would say it had nothing to do with my previous job in corporate at all. Even when I left consulting, I always thought that writing this Twitter, Substack, whatever it was online, was going to be my side gig. I've always just thought of it as a hobby. And I was just kind of like floating and figuring things out. This was in late January, early February of this year. And David Pearl, actually, he DM'd me on Twitter about this role at his school. And I thought, sure, why not? Let's try it out. And yes, the writing part I really liked, but it was that his company was extremely fun. Like, I just really liked working with those people. And I sort of just thought, hey, this is like I'll stay here indefinitely. And I write my own stuff on the side. And well, I would say this about leaving corporate, which is I've sort of revised this paradigm about arriving. This idea that once you've done X, once you've arrived at this place or this net worth, this whatever, you're happy, and then you can cruise, and then you can go back to your routine. But like, what we think of as the mundane makes up 99% of every day. Like, no matter which company you work at, what you do, what your occupation is, how many books you've written, you're gonna have to get up in the morning, you're gonna have to brush your own teeth, you're gonna have to tie your shoelaces, these normal things. So I just stopped thinking about, like, I have to be at X by X number of years, or else I don't feel like everything I do right now is worth it. I think that was the hardest mindset to toss or to rethink.
Actually, a lot of that resonates. And actually, my next blog might be on this exact topic of stop trying to make plans and set goals. Not because they're inherently bad, but because if you do that, thinking that it's the act of making a plan or setting a goal is what's going to lead you to happiness or achieve success, then you neglect the thing that may actually be closer to the root of what you should be doing, which is figuring out what your ideal day is, and then living that ideal day, and then doing it over again. And then as you live your ideal day over and over, you can adjust based on how you change as a person. And so I've gone through the same sort of mindset change. At this point, I went from like a STEM, logical, analytical person studied engineering, and then now I'm like reading and writing every day. I'm always late to things because I hate looking at my calendar and being interrupted, and I just try
Mhm.
to go with the flow. I don't know if that resonates.
100%. I think it was John Lennon who said, life happens when you're busy making other plans." I think that really sums up what you're saying. And also I think Paul Graham's essay on the maker versus manager schedule. I have a few that I really like, but that one was the one that really changed my perspective on. I think he found the blind spot of why I was so discontent with my daily kind of routine when I was in corporate, because you're just on so many calls. And like at the end of the day, if someone were to ask you, "Hey, like what did you do in those calls?" you would be like, "I don't really know." I was just talking to like one person, and yeah, we didn't get that far. It was just so absurd. Like in hindsight, I was trying to appear busy instead of actually being busy and actually doing something with that time. It was more about appearing as if you did something. So when you speak to someone slightly senior than you can say, "Hey, look, this is what I did." Fill in the time with asking for some feedback, asking them for like, "What do you think the next steps are?" And they tell you whatever you're supposed to do, and then you go back and you only have 30 minutes to do it before your next call with like someone totally, totally different. According to the essay, I'm definitely a maker, and I can't function on a manager's schedule. I'm the maker kind of person. But I think just knowing that about myself and learning that about myself was it made a huge difference in my day. Like Matt said, like your daily quality of life. What does your ideal day look like?
On the topic of ideal days, Sherry, I'm really curious, what does your day-to-day look like? Because I know for me, as someone who also is not, in traditional employment, my days vary so much. And then obviously I see what you're putting out there, like the tweets, the blogs, etc. But that's just one tiny, tiny sort of packaging and outcome of what you're doing every day. So I'm really curious what it's like for you.
My days definitely vary. I will tell you the non-negotiables though. I like taking as much time as I want with my meals and like food in general. Like I have to have coffee and a croissant in the morning, and I just like going on a walk and doing that with as much time as I want to. I find that with something like writing, you need, I wouldn't say it's 80/20, more like maybe 95/5, but it's 95% incubating and actually thinking, and 5% of like pouring those ideas onto paper. I don't know why that is. I don't know if like there's a neuroscientific reason for it, but at least for me that's what it is. Like I need a lot of, I wouldn't call it boredom, but definitely solitude. Like a lot of just downtime, like not being stimulated by conversation, by talking to other people, or doing like setting your day aside to do something, but just kind of chilling, just kind of lounging. And then that kind of incubation is what creates the tiny bit of good writing that comes out. I do write at pretty odd hours, like 4 a.m. in the morning. I can't stay
Oh,
up late. So if I'm up at 4, it's because I woke up at 4, not because I pulled an all-nighter. But yeah, I write at, I don't have a scheduled time for writing. That's what I'm trying to say. It just kind of happens when it happens.
interesting. So, okay, I
What about
agree
you?
that, yeah, I agree that probably more time is spent on the ideation, the incubation. I I agree that solitude is a place where some of these great ideas can be incubated and developed. But I actually think of this term Slack, not like the company, but it's more like Slack in the system. If you have like your day-to-day scheduled where you're always going from one thing to the other, constantly checking your calendar, your watch, etc., then you don't have that free space in your mind. I think of it like I think I'm a visual person, so I literally think of my in my head like there should be enough empty space for ideas to get connected. And I think there's these good quotes on creativity that's like creativity is just taking two ideas that are not connected and then somehow you find a way to connect them. But I'm curious for you, what are you doing when you say you're just lounging around? Like, what are you actually doing? Are you just like pacing around your room? Are you like looking at animals, like touching grass? Like, what is it?
I really enjoy people watching. Yeah, I really like seeing the people watching is interesting because you don't have the time and the capacity to know every single person that you ever see in your lifetime. But just getting a snippet of them, 3 seconds during their day, the way they walk, the shoes they wear, their outfits, their facial expression. Maybe they're on the phone and they're running somewhere. But getting to know that little bit of them is it's just interesting. It's like getting to know someone without their consent and from like one perspective for a few minutes or a few seconds. I also really enjoy working with my hands. So I like cooking. I just finished a 1,000-piece puzzle like a few days ago, so I'm starting my next one soon. Yeah, I enjoy like crafts. That's something I really love killing time on. What about you, Matt? I know you like nature. Like I see your Instagram stories and you're always like sitting by the sea or something.
Yeah, and I'm in New York now, so it's interesting. I think I get this question all the time of why are you in New York if you're a nature lover that loves to ski and surf. I I like how you said the word non-negotiable. I used to think of it like I didn't have a word for it. I actually realized recently when I was in Asia 2 months ago, I realized I came across this ideal day. And that's when this concept of stop planning and just focus on the ideal day came to me. While I was in Indonesia, I realized the ideal day for me is wake up in the morning, go for a walk, hopefully without the phone. But right now in New York, I actually opened the apartment with this app, so I have to carry my phone with me. But I try to just like people watch too in some sense, but usually I'm just like looking and trying to be aware of my surroundings. Even in sometimes of those walks, I'm already aware of how I feel. Like, is it a high energy day? Is it a low energy day? I've been getting into yoga, but to make it more convenient and realistic, I just do 10, 20 minutes of stretching on my own. And then I need a coffee as well. I just like to keep it open-ended in terms of how long I'm sitting behind my laptop reading and writing. Journal every day. And then I hit the gym around like 11:30 or noon, which is kind of when most people are eating lunch, but I like to eat my first meal like at 2 p.m. right after I finish working out. So if you think about all the things I just said, all of them are just things I do alone. And then the only time I actually hang out with people starts at like 2 or 3, which has been interesting to sort of learn about myself. I'm definitely an introvert, but yeah, those are really all the things I need to get like primed for just being full of energy, but also where those ideas start to appear.
I also want to add, I think this podcast, like the three of us so far, or like I have a feeling anyone that has ever been on this podcast it's a self-selecting sample, right? I don't know if this is an unpopular opinion, but I think creativity as a trait, like as a characteristic, it varies genetically. I don't think everyone's really creative. Everyone needs an outlet. Oh yeah, so I majored in psychology, so I thought about this quite heavily for a while when I was in school. But so the trait creativity is more of an expression of personality trait openness. The five like ocean openness, conscientiousness, so forth. So trait openness it has two facets. One is intellect, and the other is aesthetics. So intellect doesn't mean how smart you are; it just means how like analytical. Like Matt, you said, you're very analytical, right? Like how intellectual someone is doesn't mean how smart they are. It just means how receptive are they to abstract philosophical ideas. How much do they want to dive deep into an idea, or do they want to talk about something? Like I'm sure people like this. They're very smart. You probably met them in school. They're very smart, but they're not really into like debates or deep discussions. They're just kind of like they just kind of do their homework. They're good at it. They get good grades, and then they leave and they do something else. It doesn't mean they're not smart. They're just not high in trait openness. And the other side of openness, which is aesthetics, is more stereotypically, and the image we have in our head of someone who is high in openness is an artist, right? Like a painter, Da Vinci or Michelangelo or whatever like that. I had this revelation yesterday where I realized that the artist and the entrepreneur are really two types of people. They're just showing two different types of openness, or they're showing openness in two different ways. Because ultimately, the goal of art, and this could be a painting, this could be writing, could be music, but the purpose of art and entrepreneurship is the same. It's to reveal value to people. It's to use your ability to reveal beauty to other people who have not seen the beauty of something yet. At least that's what an artist does. But if you dig deeper on what beauty is ultimately about morals. It's about value. It's about what is good. It's about revealing something that shocks people in the face when they see it, when they encounter it, that really makes them stop and think and reflect on themselves and everything they're doing wrong. And if you think about tech and the tech scene of people who are they want to revolutionize, they want to disrupt, right? Like the entire concept of being disruptive, of being new, of being liberal and progressive and showing people the new way, or reinventing the industry, that is a form of
Hmm.
revealing beauty. That is the definition of revealing value to people who have not seen it yet. But I'll also say, I think creativity is talking about creativity to this part of Twitter is definitely a very biased sample, because there's a lot of people out there who are very smart and have thought about these things. They don't need the outlet. They don't need to be creative, and they don't struggle with the things that we do, which is, oh, I need to incubate, I need to have time to do nothing, I need to have, XYZ, which I think is interesting. Because sometimes I look at the people, I'm still in touch with some of the people I used to work with in corporate, or have friends who are now on more traditional paths, and I see how they live, and it just bothers me. Like, why does your life not bother you? Like, if I lived that, like, I would actually just, like, I would stop doing that. I would quit. Like, like how are you able to do that? But I'm not. And I realized that there's just some very fundamental differences in the way that people are made, like personality traits, maybe genetics. Yeah, I think it's interesting to think about, because when I realized that, I realized maybe they're just like, this is just who I am. I don't think there's something I need to fix or optimize or self-improve. This is just, it just do be like that. Like, this is it.
I definitely have at least a couple follow-ups, but I want to start with on personality traits. I've seen, like I've mentioned this before, like throughout elementary school, middle school, high school, college, I always thought of myself as this math and science kid who was very logical and analytical. In college, when I would plan vacations with my friends, I was the one in the Google Doc, in the spreadsheets, texting the group, organizing everything. And so then I became a product manager, which is also very much plan everything, think in this very rigid framework setup type thing. And then with leaving my corporate job and getting into reading and writing, and then not having the schedule and all that stuff, I feel like my personality has changed, but I don't know if it's like I'm using the word personality in a psychological, like scientific sense, or if I'm just referring to how do I feel? What's your
Mhm.
take on all this?
Well, I want to take a step back, because I think I actually don't have a very solid definition for what personality is. And I think like a Google search of what it is, I feel like those don't really satisfy me, because as someone, well, as a person with a personality, it doesn't feel like that's what personality is. I think my own personal definition, or what I think personality is a set of traits that helps you deal with things you don't know yet. It's like I wouldn't call it a mental model, but it's like I think personality is just like, it's like a it's like how you can get like different soup, like different stock at the supermarket, right? And they all have like a base flavor, and then you can like personalize that, and like you can add different spices if you want to make it different. But I think your personality is like your base flavor of stock, whatever that is. Like, people have a different natural proclivity towards different things. Like, someone who is higher in conscientiousness has a higher tendency to seek out very rigorous, very demanding jobs like big law, banking, and they will love doing it, because they need that burden, they need that yoke on their shoulders. Otherwise, if they have no duty, they'd go crazy. But on the opposite end, if you're someone who's very low conscientiousness, first of all, you probably wouldn't get a job in a big law firm. You probably wouldn't land. You wouldn't compete with the people who are more conscientious than you. But also, if you got the job, you wouldn't do very well in it. All to say, I think personality is just, and the big five is just one way of breaking that down. I think it's the most accurate way we have so far. But no matter how you break it down, I think someone's personality is just like the thing you need in the moment to deal with the situation at the moment.
Hmm. Okay, there's this other thing I wanted to ask you about based on what you were saying before. You were saying the word beauty and the word value, sort of like one word in one sentence and then followed by the other word in the next
Mhm.
sentence. It almost sounded like you were using it interchangeably, and I know like this is a podcast, so we're just sort of like rambling off the cuff here.
Mhm.
But on this like relationship between beauty and value, how much overlap do you see there?
I think they're somewhat equal. I think beauty is very related to value, I think in a very intimate way, because, well, beauty is one of those things where I'll start with this. I'm sure everyone has probably had this kind of experience. Say, like, for example, when you're standing on the beach and you're seeing a sunset, or you walk into one of those like ancient 500,000-year-old cathedrals in Europe, like, or you're listening to live symphonic music, like those moments where you just get like goosebumps, like you get physiological, like literal chills up and down your body. Like moments like those are proof that beauty is beyond you. Like beauty is not something you choose to see and like register and react. Beauty happens to you. Beauty is a reaction. It's not like it's not a product of reason. It's something that happens. You see it and then you you are overcome by it. You know how I'm just trying to think and talk at the same time. So for example, when Immanuel Kant said something like, a beauty is the sign of the morally good. Well, in a way that's quite literally true, because like beauty is a portal into the greater good. Beauty is terrifying, and beauty, we want to look at it, yet we want to look away from it, because when we see something that is more beautiful and we know is more beautiful, it's kind of like that thing of beauty is saying to us, like, I'm closer to perfect than you are, and this is how far away you are, and this is how much you could still work on. The reason why beauty shocks us is because it reflects back at us everything we are inadequate. And it kind of makes us see that, like, this is the ideal of what things could be like, but it's not. And I can't help but think about Beauty and the Beast, the cartoon. Well, her name is literally Beauty in English, like Belle in French. So it's interesting because, I mean, I think the entire Disney movie can kind of be taken from a very psychological standpoint, which is, if beauty is good, if Belle, she's the princess, if she represents the morally good and the just, which she is, right? Like she's diligent. She wakes up before the entire village. She bakes bread. She reads books. Like there's nothing wrong with this girl. Like she's literally a 10. Like she's kind of the ideal of not just a woman, but of a human, right? Like everyone loves Belle. Everyone thinks that she's great. And well, we know that she gets together with the Beast, and Carl Jung would say that the Beast represents the shadow of man. If Belle is the good parts of us, then Beast is the shadow of a human psyche. He's aggressive. He has to be locked up because he can't control his aggression. Who knows what he'd do if we let him run wild in the village, right? But what we see is that Belle becomes more beautiful when she is with the Beast. The good parts of us become even better when we integrate it with our shadow. And there's a critical scene in that movie where Gaston, the other pursuer, this very narcissistic macho guy, who by the way represents the persona, because he's the kind of guy that would sacrifice everything for status and for the ladies, for whatever the town people want to see him as. And he goes after Belle's father. And the reason why that's significant is because, well, if Belle is the daughter of her father, that also means that Beauty is the child of God, because beauty is your portal into the ideal goodness, the ultimate accumulation of good conscious being. And if that is colloquially and culturally what we mean by God when we refer to the divine, the heavens. And what I think that scene means a lot to me, because when we see that Gaston goes after her father, we see that people actually do this a lot, which is people will do anything for their persona. They will sacrifice their relationship with God. They will sacrifice their ability to tell the truth for the sake of status, for the sake of their image, for the sake of how they want to be seen. I think there's I know I'm on a tangent, but I think there's a very intimate relationship between truth, beauty, and value, as in something that's truly good. Like truly in the positive valence.
Are you speaking about beauty? You're speaking about beauty very, I think, objectively in some ways. And I'm curious what your thoughts are on our perception of what's beautiful, maybe from a human perspective, from an individual perspective. For instance, when animals go out there and have their mating rituals, some of the birds have the most beautiful arrangement of feathers to be able to attract others, right? Or the most beautiful display of song. And that's something that even us as humans can interpret and understand. But then there's other situations where it makes you believe that beauty is subjective in so many ways, right? From even fashion standards to physique standards over the years. What was beautiful maybe 100 years ago is no longer today. So how do you think about the authenticity of what is beautiful and how that is able to translate across different people, times, and even like species?
I would say that there's a difference between beauty and taste. I think taste changes, fashion changes, style changes, but I think ultimately beauty is more than just beauty is more than a golden ratio. It's more than a measurable geometric thing. I think of beauty as being more of it's the goosebumps that stand up when you're standing in a cathedral. It's the awe that washes over you when you feel infinitely small standing on, a big beach and the entire sky is orange and red. I think that's beauty. It's the feeling you get. It's the subjective feeling of I'm so small. Like I'm literally nothing in the grand scheme of things, and I can be so much more.
Sherry, you mentioned you like cooking, right? There's
Mhm.
something to be said about hobbies that could be offset or replaced by financial services or transactions. Like, you don't have to cook. You could go out to eat and have someone cook for you. But you could even like take it one step further and have HelloFresh deliver you a meal kit and you don't have to get groceries. So you've like used currency or financial dollars to avoid this thing that brings you joy. You could even like DoorDash your meals and then sit alone and eat your meal, right? Like I noticed that in society we've sort of like outsourced meaning and hobbies to financial things, financial transactions. And that's why I notice I'm drawn to things that are the opposite of like cooking. I don't do pottery, but I'm interested in pottery, like arts and crafts, even gardening, right? Like these are things that have been like overly, I don't know what the right word is, financialized. And so almost maybe like we should be looking at how can we return back to the old days where we just sort of like do things on our own, barter with our neighbors, share things without Venmo charging each other a couple dollars here and there for Ubers, stuff like that.
I want to reframe that because, well, I don't necessarily think that people are consciously paying their way out of things that are meaningful, because if they knew that that was meaningful, they would never pay for it. People who have had a true taste of what's meaningful to them, that's priceless. Like, there's nothing you can trade for that. So I don't think people are consciously losing meaning in their lives by trading it away, by paying their way out of it. I will say that there is, well, the first point to come out of that is to say that people definitely value convenience, right? Like when they buy HelloFresh, not something I will ever do. If they get HelloFresh, or if they get a private chef, or they eat out, that just means they value the time saved, whatever saved for them to do other things. Going back to your original thing about value, I kind of want to tie the word value to privilege, because I think there needs to be a paradigm shift, which is actually what I'm writing right now, is privilege is not the presence of perks and benefits. It's the absence of obstacles. Like, for example, when like if your parents tell you about, like, Matt, when I was your age, I walked like 5 miles to school every morning and I had to like trek through a mountain to get back home. You know those stories, right? Like
That's my
and then
dad's story.
exactly, and then they compare it back to you. They're like, well, Abe, you know what, you get a ride to school, like you get a comfy ride to school. I didn't have that when I was your age. And they say something like that. Well, the point of those stories is to make you more grateful, is to make you more like, hey, look at all you have, why are you still complaining? But more so, it's not that people don't want to be grateful. It's gratitude equals happiness is such a like a no-brainer, right? Like everyone on Twitter and self-help genre talks about, go be more grateful, say thank you, and like you'll be happier. But like, it's not that we don't want to be grateful, it's just that we have the tendency to overvalue what we don't have and undervalue what we already do. It's because we don't see privilege as the lack of obstacles. We see it only as a collection of, it's the lump sum of what we have, all the benefits we have. So in the example of
Mhm.
your parents going to school, you having a comfy ride to school is not your privilege. You not having to walk 5 miles and climb mountains there and back is your privilege. It's the negative. It's what you didn't have to do to get to where you are. That's your privilege. So if we link back to value, and this whole getting your grocery, your food cooked for you and everything, what, instead of seeing what you have, why don't we focus on what are you getting away from? What are you avoiding by doing so? Sure, you have convenience and you have your food delivered to you and prepared for you at the table, but you're missing out on a probably very primal connection between humans and their food. Because, we're an animal, and like all animals probably have a thing for food. Like we all have a very carnal sort of instinct for taste and smells. And you're removing a huge part of that. And, it can't be natural. It can't be good to be that far away from the very process of eating, which is something that you have to do to stay alive. I think that's at least that's how I would look at the whole value and losing hobbies sort of conversation.
I kind of want to get your thought on something semi-related here, and it goes around all the way back to like being grateful and what you choose to do with your time. I think you wrote somewhere in your blogs that when I have turns into I get, duty becomes our delight. And I think a lot of your writing balances between, choosing your own attitude, choosing and controlling your own destiny in that sense. And I think flipping that coin around it really helps you be more grateful for some of these things. What point, how far would you say you should stretch that I have to I get to, and turning every situation into almost like a privilege or a value to you? How do you balance that?
I would say radically. I mean, the book, the spoilers, but the book I want to release early next year is called 7 Principles of Self-Stewardship. And self-stewardship is the concept I want to be associated with if I, establish some kind of online voice, which I sort of have. But what self-stewardship essentially is you have to think of yourself as someone you're responsible for taking care of. You have to imagine this body, this being, as being loaned to you. Like, for example, like you have to pretend that someone, you don't have to be Christian, you don't have to be Abrahamic, one of the Abrahamic religions, but say, you have to imagine that as if a higher being, and in a way, it really is a higher being because nobody asked to be born. We all exist not without our consent. We came into this world without asking to. So in a way, being alive alone is not a right. It's not something we have because, well, I chose to be here, therefore I should have it handed to me. The very fact that we come into this world without asking to be born is saying that life is a gift. It's given to you because you are supposed to be a steward of it. When a shepherd takes care of his sheep, we call it stewarding. You take care of the farm animals. So I think when people have that mindset shift, that sort of paradigm shift in their head about what it means to have another day, to wake up alive again, and that being such a gift, like waking up in the morning is a privilege. Like waking up in the morning is such a privilege when you think of it that way. To think that life was drawn forth from nothing, it's grace. The meaning of grace is something that is given to you not because you deserve it, but because someone else was graceful, someone else was, if you pay for the person behind you, it's not because they deserved it, it's because you wanted to. It's because you were being a good person. So I think when you think of life in that terms, you want to take better care of yourself. You want to sleep earlier. You want to eat healthier because, well, if this body is if it's a lease, if I'm supposed to be taking good care of it, then it's my job to take good care of it. So yeah, to answer that, I think this is something like I have a radical opinion on, which is I think people should have that radical want to see things as a privilege and not as a right.
Overnight, you managed to gain, I think, over 40,000 followers on Twitter. How does that kind of relationship to your following then weigh on you? And how do those nodes impact the way you present yourself and your writing and your thought?
Oh yeah, so funny enough, I actually I don't check Twitter that frequently, and I didn't actually open Twitter like almost 48 hours after that growth spurt. So like I had no idea what was going on the entire time. It was also nighttime, so I just like basically went to bed, and then like the next day I just like did whatever. I didn't even open the app again until much later. I will say it's really bizarre because I did tweet about this because I think in my head conceptually, numbers when they get really big, it's hard to think about. Conceptually, I can see what like 7,000 people in an enclosed space look like. If like I just imagine Carnegie Hall, but anything more than that, it's a little crazy to think about. I remember I googled like there's this football field in like I think it was Madrid or something that actually houses max capacity 75,000, And I was like, whoa, that's like how many followers I have. That's like, imagine this stadium full of people and I have to like announce my thoughts in the center of that every day. Like that was a crazy feeling. But I also think about the story of the Tower of Babel from the Bible, which is the story of all these people that come together to build this one tower, hopefully to reach heaven. It was this like great unionization of builders, and they all want to like speak the same language. They want to like create one singular village where, you know, they can climb to the heavens and kind of outdo God in a sense. And what happens to them is, well, they topple and they get punished by being sent to wander and not being able to communicate with each other ever again. The reason why I think that's a good story relevant to fame, and I think especially in today's world with social media, is that I don't think social media is natural. Like, it's normal, but what's normal isn't always what's natural. And by natural, I mean, you know, without social media, we wouldn't be meeting this many people so far away in a single lifetime. We wouldn't know this many people. Like, I don't think the average, like, I'm sure I can pass 75,000 people in my lifetime by walking on the streets, but I don't think I will ever get to know or have such a connection, a link with 75,000 people in my lifetime. Like, I don't think that's possible for anyone in any time of history. And to be known by more people who that you know back is such a, it's kind of an uneasy feeling in a way. So I try not to think about the number too much, just because I do think it's kind of arbitrary. Like, I don't think it means anything to me. But yeah, I think the concept of fame is scary. I also don't really want, I'm also kind of scared of fame for that reason, because I feel like it's unnatural.
Okay, changing gears a little bit. I've got a lot of random topics listed here. I've been thinking about what it means to be cool. You've also written about coolness. You said people who are comfortable being themselves, regardless of who they're around, just radiate coolness. They're effortless because they're just doing what's most natural to them. That level of belief in oneself is true confidence. No ego, just pure poise. I've been thinking about coolness because I realized like 2 weeks ago, I went from this one really nerdy dinner where like people brought like topics to teach each other, and I learned about like differential privacy and neurotech. It was so nerdy, but I loved it. I was talking about the philosophy of science with this one dude for 30 minutes. And also it's funny because it was supposed to be a potluck, and I brought Popeye's chicken and everyone else just brought fruit. So everyone was just eating fruit and we each got like one chicken wing. But anyways, I think right after that dinner on a Friday night, I like went out to the bar or to the club. And it's like weird seeing this contrast of like this super nerdy thing and this cool thing. And like I did both in the same night. And it's obviously me, the one person. And where am I going with this? I think in high school, middle school, like there was a shared definition of cool. There was like the attractive people that played sports and you would attract the other gender, right? Like, but I think this definition of cool is changing as we get older. And maybe it does have to do with becoming more authentic, becoming more self-confident in who you are and figuring out who you actually are and acting in accordance to that. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, that's very interesting. Yeah, you're right. I think before a certain age, the most popular, like the most popular guys at school were the ones who like, I'm talking like grade 2, right? Like very young. Like the most popular guys in grade 2 were the ones who ran the fastest. Like they were just fast. Like they you could just run, right? They could just run on the playground. Like that was pretty cool. Yeah, and then, you know, high school and then college. Well, I think the point you're making is evolutionary to a certain extent, right? Like sort of physical attractiveness. And if you think evolutionary enough, well, what's the purpose of having riz or like being cool in general? It's to reproduce, right? It's having the chance to win, to woo the other sex and have the chance of, you know, passing your genes down. But I think kind of taking it a bit more abstract, being cool or just feeling like someone is cool is just, well, I tend to notice when people are comfortable with themselves, I'm comfortable around them. Like when you're around like super awkward or noticeably self-conscious people, you also kind of mirror that self-consciousness or that lack of ability to self-regulate emotions, because, well, number one, there is such thing as like the mirror neurons, right? Like the kind of the biological evidence for human sympathy, which is we we mirror each other emotionally. That's how we can bond and empathize with the tribe. But also because when someone's self-conscious, you just don't know like which buttons you can press. Like you don't know if you can step on eggshells around them. Like you don't know what's going to trigger them or what they like or what they don't like. I think the reason why people like being around confident people is that they're comfortable to be themselves around them. They don't feel like they're going to be judged. They don't feel like they're going to be shamed. I also think a main ingredient in coolness is just humility. Like people who are self-aware and don't talk out of turn and admit it when they don't know something that they don't know, it makes everyone else feel like they're able to admit things they don't know. For example, I think a lot of coolness kind of boils down to like a balance of humility and also confidence, which is like knowing when to stand up for yourself.
You said something I'm really interested in. You said the days between December 25th and January 1st trigger a very deep sense of memento mori. What are your thoughts on the end of the year and what it brings out of us? And also just like in seasons in general. I've written about sort of how I see myself changing throughout the seasons. Do you see something similar in yourself?
Well, I definitely own the summer. Like that's just it's like summer is just like summer Olympics for me. Like I live for the season. Like I'm like a plant. Like I literally come alive in the summertime. I think the season. No, I think you mean season by like the season in your life. But I also think like the physical seasons have like an effect on me, like a truly drastic effect on me. Yeah, but that's so any one of my tweets before March. I mean, no, like yeah, before March this year, I would say is kind of like I don't think too much before I tweet. I really don't think that deeply before I tweet. Yeah, have you read the book, or do you know about the book? Because I haven't read it myself. But do you know the book 4,000 Weeks, or was it 8,000?
Loved it.
Yeah, 4,000.
4,000 weeks.
Right?
Yeah,
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Like
it's great. Yeah.
I mean, when I first heard about the book, I was like, oh, what is it about? Like 4,000. It didn't occur to me that that is the human lifespan. Like we only like weeks go by
Mm.
so quickly, especially when you work in corporate, things are a project is measured by weeks, and everything's kind of like week one, week two, and then before you know it, a quarter is gone, and then half the year is gone, and the year is gone, and like it's kind of crazy when you break down time so granularly to exactly how many weeks you live. I think it's kind of terrifying because it really makes you think like how wow, like life is really short. Life is truly truly very short. But I think especially those few days at the end of the year, the reason why it's so I don't know what's the adjective form of this word, but like in a vacuum is because first of all it's the holiday. So like everyone's slowing down, no one's bothering you, you're not bothering anyone. But also like the holidays are also sort of done. Like no one's celebrating anything anymore. You're just sort of like marinating in this realization of like, well, 3 more days and the year's gone, and we're gonna do this all over again. People usually pick up their James Clear Atomic Habits copy around this time of the year, and they like really rethink their life.
Sign
And
up for the gym.
yeah. The equinox, yeah, the things like that. Yeah, so yeah, I think there's something universally like unnerving about the last few days of a year, especially if you're in Canada and like it's cold. It's also it's bleak outside. It's not a pleasant view usually. Yeah, so it just kind of adds to that like blanket of melancholia.
Sure, I feel like we've learned a lot about the things that you're thinking through in the moment in the past. I would love to also get a little bit of a glimpse of what kind of life would you want to shape for yourself in the next few years, since we're talking about New Year's resolutions. You've just finished writing your book, it's on Amazon. What does a successful life look like to you in as far as you can project it out?
I'll be writing for sure, indefinitely. Yeah, I'll keep running my Substack. I'm still working with David Perel at the moment, so I'll keep that going. I really love the company and like everyone at that company just like they really like stand for something. Yeah, that's what I feel like. So I'll stay there indefinitely. Yeah, I don't know how to answer that question. I mean, I've never been the kind of person to make a 5-year plan. I've never been asked that in an interview, luckily. I don't really yeah, I don't really make plans, I guess, in that sense.
I feel like there's got to be quotes on like something along the lines of like all great writers read a lot, or I think even just in general, like all great artists or people that produce new things, creative things, they they like study or consume a lot of the other mediums to develop taste in some sense. So I'm curious, what is your sort of like, whether you want to call it process or anti-process of reading? Like I think we've talked about this in person before. Like you read a certain type of book or a certain type of information. What is that?
So I'm a very slow reader. Like I've only gotten through like I think like 4 books, 5 books this year. And like some parts of it I've skipped just because like I just found it boring. But I think good books are worth really, really like reading over and over again. Like I've read East of Eden 3 times now, cover to cover 3 times, and it's a pretty thick book. And well, it's just because I get so much from it. But like a funny fiction that came out 2 years ago, I'll probably just like read it once half-heartedly and laugh and like throw it away. I mean, I do read those books, and I'm not trying to like I'm not trying to condescend those books or say that they're less important because they do serve their own value. I think it's very entertaining and it's funny to read it. And, looking at other people's writing style is also a fun thing to do on its own, but I don't think it adds to my pool of general interest, which is human nature, curiosity, living purposefully, things like that. I don't think it really contributes to that, which is why I naturally just don't gravitate. My brain just doesn't really go there a lot. But I really like the classics. Like I think the classics are classical for a reason. And I like a lot of my friends would say I'm pretty old fashioned or that I have an old soul, but I like classical things in general more than contemporary just because they just stand the test of time. Like there's a reason why like you read a book that's been hundreds of years old, or like I listen to a ton of classical music and it's just like you see the reason why it's a classical. And like classical things feel like a well that never dries up. You can always read it again and think of it, like think it in a new way. Or yeah, I don't know how to rephrase that.
I think it's hard when you have lyrics to sort of withstand the test of time. I think they're really relevant for certain cultural things in the moment, and those just can't withstand over time. But when it's something just universally understood and there's no lyrics behind it, I think that's just ages a little bit better. Same thing with like a digital screen. Like the analog watch is withstood hundreds of years. Meanwhile, you put a digital screen in any luxury car and it's going to age extremely quickly.
I also think there's
Hmm.
a element of genius. Mozart and Beethoven, they were quite literally they were geniuses. Like Mozart only lived to be 35. He started playing music when he was 2. He started composing when he was 5. In 35 years, he wrote over 200 hours of music. And the thing with Mozart is that he never edited his writing, his composition. He basically just wrote it as he was thinking of it. Mozart likes to say that like God composed and I dictated. Like the writing just kind of like it went through him. It used him as an instrument, used his hand as an instrument to write it. So I think there is something to be said about like actual geniuses in the world. And like there's no amount of luck or training that gets you there.
I wonder to what extent the classics are classics because they existed at a time where there's so few distractions. So the like separation of signal from noise was much easier. And if that's true, let's just say that is true. And if you apply that today, then like the way to find more geniuses would be to remove all the distractions, like TikTok or garbage quality media, whatever. But today it's super hard to get away from all this stuff. Like you really have to try really hard to avoid distractions.
Well, how do you know? Well,
Yeah, I
like how
don't,
do you
that
know
was just a
that?
random thought.
Yeah, but like how do you know in their time they didn't think, oh, geez, like kids these days, like what if like 200 years ago people had so little distractions, and what if 200 years from now we have no idea like what kind of distractions people are gonna have that we don't have today. Yeah, I don't know. Like I mean, I'm just thinking about Downton Abbey. Like, I think I mean, they are like upper class, but if you think about like the normal person in that village at that time, probably had very little leisure time. Like they had to work whatever work was. They had to like work the land, feed the family. Doctors were with patients all day. Yeah, I don't really know if leisure and distraction is the right factors to think about. I also feel like people attribute too much of like classiness to classical music, and that being the reason why it lasts. Because like I mean, Mozart was sending like not safe for work letters to his cousin. Like he was not a classy guy by all means. You know, he was not like a very sophisticated guy by all means.
I did not know that.
Oh yeah, so the life of Mozart is something I can give like a 40-minute presentation on without preparation. Yeah, like I think people were not as classy or sophisticated as we imagine them to be. And I also don't think they're as like more pure or rationalistic or whatever as people are today.
Well, as we wrap here, Sherry, what are some of the things you're thinking about? What are some of these work in progress ideas that are swirling in your head that may or may not make it onto your book or onto Pluripotent?
So
No.
the privilege and you know what it means to have versus like the obstacle, that thing. I've been thinking about that, and I've been thinking more about the role that fortune and fate play in our lives. But I think that in modern times we attribute too much to rationality and control, like wanting to have control. We forget that a lot of like a factor that has never changed in no matter which civilization, no matter which age and which culture, that everyone has fortune and fates. And I think we sort of neglected that. We used to call, you know, people of lower socioeconomic standings, we used to call them unfortunate. Like they're unfortunate people. We don't call them poor. Like we don't I think we're over financialized society. Like we don't used to call people poor. We just call them as if they were not blessed. They were not given, you know, they were not looked upon by fortune and fate. And I think, well, why don't we talk about fate and fortune as much anymore? I think there's a need for, and it correlates with the rise of atheism, which is there's a need for control and absolute agency, absolute sort of there is no other sort of, you know, control over my life. I get to decide my own destiny. I mean, in a way you do, but that doesn't mean fortune doesn't also play a role in that. The most recent novel that I reread was Pachinko by Minjin Lee. It's about it's a Korean, it's an epic. It's like multi-generational Korean family, Korean Japanese family throughout the 20th century. And Pachinko is this parlor game popular in Japan. And a few of the characters in the story, they run a pachinko parlor, which is it's kind of like a casino. It's like a gambling thing that people like to play. And it's basically like a ball, like a marble you drop at the top. And there are many like pegs in the wall of the machine, and the ball just kind of like falls through and it hits on the pegs. And depending on, you know, which way it falls, which way the cookie crumbles, like it falls into these little things at the bottom and decides if you win or not. But the characters who run that parlor, well, you know, every morning before they open the shop, they tweak the machines ever so little so that when people actually play on the machines, they get the illusion that they win the first few hands, or they get the illusion that they have some kind of control over the ball. And I think it's a very beautiful title for the book and for kind of the moral of the story in general, which is you see all these lives play out, and because it's a book, you know, every life is like a few pages long or like a few chapters long, but you think that like our real life is not that different from a book. We can simply write about our lives within a few chapters if we wanted to, if there was like a bigger author than us. And if we were able to look back on the 80 years of us on Earth within like a character in a novel, how would we think of the things that happened to us? You know, I really think that like me meeting David Perel was not of my working at all. Like I think it was just my fortune. I think that's just what fate wanted for me. And yeah, I think that somehow like meeting people through Twitter is also sort of like it's fortune. I don't think I wanted any of this, and I don't think I could plan for it if I wanted to, but I didn't. And that's the fact. I didn't plan for any of this.
I think you've spoken a lot today about overall agency, how you can increase the surface area of your luck, and how you should live a life that you choose and not one that you settle for. And yet you have the strong inkling of fortune and the role that it plays out in our lives. So how do you settle between the two? How do you choose and have agency while also feel free enough to just accept some things as fortune?
I think there is fate, but I also think we have free will. I don't think those two are I see how it sounds contradictory, but I think that I would usually assort to I would think about like the story of Adam and Eve, like the common sort of debates around religion and evil in the world is, well, if every religion claims to have like an all-loving God who is capable of everything because he's all powerful, then why is there evil in the world? Well, it's like saying he placed Adam and Eve in a perfect paradise garden to do whatever they want, with only one rule, which is don't eat from the certain tree. And it's I think the significance of the story is like no matter how good things are for you, no matter how beautiful of a paradise you've created for yourself, you can never keep the snake out. There's always a snake in the garden. There's always there's always something you don't know within the known. Like there's always danger that you do not plan for or you do not expect. And well, like why would God place Adam and Eve in a garden with the tree if tells them not to eat from the tree? Why not just like cut the tree down from the very beginning? Well, you can explain that by saying God respects people to have free will, to give them the ability to either do it or not do it. That's freedom. That's the ability to do something outside of what is deterministic, out of fate. Yeah, I think free will is. Yeah, I believe in free will. I think it's important. I don't have this all figured out. Like I feel like it gets very complicated if you try to explain how free will and determinism kind of coexists.
Yeah.
But I do think they coexist in a way.
Awesome.
Well, I'm really looking forward to seeing those two ideas get fleshed out and hopefully make it into pluripotent. I'm really excited to read it, and just wanted to say thanks again for coming on the podcast. This was a lot of fun.
Thank you for having me.
Thanks for sharing all your thoughts.
It was really fun. Thank you.